Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the virtual edition of the OIAF. I love seeing so many familiar names in the participants lists. Thanks for coming to everything. It's been really fun. I feel like we have this sense of community. We have a really special program for you here today. I've been trying to get Peter here for a couple of years, so this is very exciting for me. This is a conversation with Peter Ramsey, and it's presented by ASIFA. And moderating the talk today is Frank Gladstone, who's the executive director of ASIFA-Hollywood. Remember to use the chat or the Q&A function to send in your questions, and if we have time, we'll try to get to them. Thanks everyone so much, and take it away, Frank.
Hi, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Appreciate being here at Ottawa. It's been a long time since I got to attend the festival, but I loved when I did. And we even went on a ghost tour back in those days. I want to introduce Peter. Probably everybody on this webinar knows him, but I thought it would be good to go real quickly. As you know, he's a film director and illustrator and writer. He's best known for Rise of the Guardians. In animation circles, he's best known for Rise of the Guardians and, of course, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, which he co-directed with Bob Pachetti and Rodney Rothman. He grew up in LA in the Crenshaw district and bussed into high school, which is Palisades Charter High School, also called Poly, which was it's a public school. And then he went to UCLA, right, Peter? UCLA, which means I'm not allowed to talk with you because my kids went to USC. So sorry, this is over now.
Oh,
no,
boy. It's all over.
Yeah.
I'm out of here.
And then went to Los Angeles.
I dropped out after 2 years, so I'm only half a Bruin anyway.
Yeah, and then you went to the other 2 years at Los Angeles City, right? To a Los Angeles City College.
Hello.
I did.
Not for a full 2 years, just for a few. I'm a bum. I went for a few classes. That's about it.
Oh, well, okay.
I'm not very educated.
But you do draw well. And I thought to start, because I'll ask a few questions and then we'll start to see questions coming into the Q&A. And we'll ask the questions of the audience, which is very important. But I thought to start, as you're a kid, you know, growing up in Crenshaw, what is it that did film and animation and just cinema in general draw you, or is this something that kind of happened later? What started you down this path?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, you know, back in those days, you know, pre-internet and I think also even pre-wide knowledge of the workings of the entertainment industry, you know, movies and TV shows, cartoons. I mean, I devoured all that stuff, but the makings of it was all a mystery to me. And there was nobody in my immediate vicinity or neighborhood that had any connection to the movies or to TV or anything like that. So really, you know, I had no idea that was something that a person like me could even aspire to working in. It just never crossed my mind until much later, till I was pretty much going into my 20s, that I understood that, you know, hey, people who, you know, put on their pants one leg at a time make movies. You know, I thought it was some weird, I didn't know what it was, you know. And it's strange because, you know, I grew up maybe 10 miles from Hollywood, you know, so it was I would hop on the 85 bus, go up Crenshaw Boulevard, and, you know, I'd be there in a half hour, but there was never any thought about me actually participating in that business. And yeah, it was, but, you know, I was drawn to it. I was drawn to storytelling. I was drawn to drama. I was drawn to, you know, the visual. And so I drew like ever since I was a young kid, and that was kind of my gateway into everything else.
So drawing was something that you were kind of inherent in your coming up. Yes, you were the drawing kid in school, right?
That's right. Absolutely.
Yeah. And oh yeah, go to Peter. He'll draw a caricature or whatever. Mm-hmm. And then you studied painting. So I guess you were thinking at the time to be maybe a fine artist or something like that. Or,
well, you know, that was another weird thing because, you know, I graduated college, high school rather, and I was 17 years old. And, you know, I'd had, you know, high school art classes. and that's basically like, copy a draw something out of National Geographic in watercolor or whatever. And then I was reading like comic books, and my idea of an artist was, wow, look at that painting on the cover of that Conan the Barbarian paperback. I wish I could paint like Frank Frazetta. That's
There
like,
you go. I was going to say Frank Frazetta, huh?
So I had, my first studio art class at UCLA. I mean, on the first day, the teacher said, "Oh, we're going to be teaching this class in photograms." And I went, "What?" And photograms, they're actually super cool. And artists like Man Ray and, any number of like, avant-garde artists like, use that form, which I learned later. But my first day at UCLA in art studio class, I mean, I thought I was going to be painting and have my little smock and, put the apple in the light and all that stuff. But this was like, I had no idea. And it was just a function of me not having a broad understanding of what art really was. So it really kind of knocked me for a loop, and it actually forced me to question, well, man, am I an artist, or what is it that I'm really into? What's going on here? And that kind of led me to film.
Now, you're a young kid. Before you go to school, you're a young kid, you're drawing. That seems to be your thing. Your folks were happy about that? Or would they encourage you?
They're totally fine with it. I mean, my dad was a mailman. My mom was an educational aide at the public school near our house, the elementary school that I went to. Mm-hmm. And it was fine. I played football and basketball out in the street with the other kids and rode my bike and did everything else. But I was also, I had always been a huge reader because my mom taught me to read early. Right. So, they knew I had kind of this bookish side, and, they'd see me drawing and reading the comic books, and, I think my dad would just shrug and was like, okay, well, you know how to throw a football. So, okay, I'm happy with that. Okay. And, but there was no pressure in any direction on me, which was great.
So, and then I'm going to start, we've already got some questions, so I'm going to go into those, but I wanted to kind of get the background. Eventually you say, well, look, movies, I could do that. This might be the thing. Yeah. Did you have a mentor or a hero or somebody that kind of pushed you forward, whether you knew them or not? Was there somebody that you wanted to emulate, or that showed you the way?
Actually, my first mentors were a couple of friends of mine. These guys were like 1 or 2 years older than me, and I really looked up to them. And they were really getting seriously into film. Like, I was into film on the level of, Star Wars had blown me away. And before that, it was Godzilla movies and King Kong and, all the usuals. But my friend Vincent, who passed away quite a few years ago, had started really getting into the great films of the 70s. Mm. And he was the first person I ever heard talk about directors' names. Like Coppola, Scorsese, Michael Cimino, all these guys who were working in the 70s on grown-up movies. And it just had this mystique about it, and he was so into it. And I think that really got me like, oh, wait a minute. People make movies, and they make decisions about what they're going to be like. And that started to intrigue me. Although, it was still like, oh my God, it was like Coppola, look at The Godfather, and it's like, nobody can make that. It just comes down from space and lands like that. Nobody could ever possibly make that. And then you start understanding, no, people do make those things.
Yeah, there's
a few years after that, I really understood that, wow, that's something that people do.
Did Vincent, did he know that you ended up working for some of those guys?
Vincent passed away just as I was starting to get into the film business, just as I was starting. So he never, it's so, I mean, I think about him all the time. He was a brilliant artist also. He was a brilliant artist, excellent painter, but another guy who never made the leap I can work in movies. Never made that. It just wasn't part of our world.
That's interesting because, a real personal thing, I'll just be quick. When I was recruiting for one of the major studios years ago, and I would go to historically and traditionally Black universities, that seemed to be the issue. Was art. And it was probably because your first generation college kid doesn't go into become an artist. Your first generation college kid goes to become a doctor or lawyer. Exactly. or something like a business person.
Exactly.
And I got a lot of that. It just wasn't part of my coming up.
Yeah, no, it just seems pie in the sky, and especially at that time, there weren't a lot of black role models or people of color who you could see. Oh, they're directing movies, and everybody knows about them.
Right.
You know, there were people working, but it was, you know, they didn't get the publicity, they didn't get the acclaim or the exposure, so you didn't. That was another thing that you just, you know, it just didn't have a kind of reality or tangible quality to it.
And that kind of brings up this other point before we get to the questions from the audience. All you guys, hi, is you are one of the few African-American people in our business. We've been talking about this as the industry, the filmmaking industry, for a while now, that this is underrepresented communities, of which African-Americans are an obvious one. And now that things have changed, and we're Black Lives Matter and George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and all of those things, we go to, as the industry, go to people to ask questions and find out, and you're one of them. So you've become this kind of a representative. And I don't, you know, how do you deal with that? Do you like it? Is it crazy? Do you have patience for it? How do you do it?
Yeah, it's funny because it's one of those things that, you know, I think there are very few people who, you know, aspire toward being, you know, toward that being their thing in one sense. In another sense, I feel like it's the very least I can do, because, you know, you just think of all the other people who have never had the chance to be asked, you know, who have been actively kept out, the people who have made huge sacrifices or toiled in obscurity, you know, knowing that they were never gonna get past a certain, you know, point. So to see this moment, you know, that we're in now, and to realize that people actually do sincerely want to know more and want things to change, I'll do anything I can to help that in any little way I can. And just, you know, sitting here flapping my lips, if that helps, I'm more than happy to do it. My one caveat is that I still speak as an artist and an individual, and there's no as a wannabe artist, I'll say, and as an individual, there's nobody who can speak for everybody, or, you know, really be, you know, conclusive about, you know, answers or whatever. But I'm more than happy to share my experience and my perspective.
Good. That's a good thing. I'm gonna start with the questions that have come in.
Great.
And then, you know, can you go with that?
Yeah.
This for fun is from Rick. He says, "Great to see you both." Good. Something basic. What inspires you from day to day? That's a great question. We can spend an hour on that one.
I'll give the classic freelance artist answer: the mortgage, the water bill. No. What inspires me from day to day? I think what inspires me from day to day really is a couple of things. I think, you know, all the stuff I've always loved, you know, all the films and the artwork. I mean, that I'm lucky enough after all these years that I've been in this business to still be here is like, it's miraculous to me. So I always kind of pinch myself and, like, you know, it's always that feeling of, man, you're still fooling them. They haven't caught you yet. And I think, but thinking beyond that, just thinking about the medium as a whole, there's so much to learn. There's so much, it's just infinite, you know, the understanding of movie making, of the form. I mean, I've scratched so little of the surface, even, I feel, as far as what I've done, you know? So to me, it's to have the chance to be able just to explore further, hopefully, and just really plunge into something and feel like you're part of this continuity that's got all these incredible figures in it. It's amazing. It's amazing. So that's super inspiring. The fact that there's still so many venues, and the technology has made it so much easier that's inspiring. So all that stuff.
That's, yeah, I think, you know, you've worked for a lot of live action guys.
Yeah.
I took a list, and it's
Yeah.
a partial: Spielberg, Coppola, Singleton, Duvernay, Spike Jonze, Robert Zemeckis, Ang Lee, David Mamet, Ron Howard, Roland Emmerich, and lots of others I left off the list.
Yeah. Yeah.
And those were, you were working with them on live action shows as an illustrator or as a storyboard artist.
Yeah.
And generally speaking, that's working fairly close with the directors. You just talked about this idea of it, what inspires you to do these films. Did you learn from those what did you learn to do, if anything, and what did you learn not to do, if anything? That's a pretty good question.
You know, yeah, I learned a ton, and one of the things, you know, just in aggregate or as a whole, that I learned working with these guys, because a lot of for the most of the time as a storyboard artist, you're one of the first people on the movie.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I've been hired on movies where it was literally me and the director, and there was no production designer yet. Sometimes there was no, I mean, you name it. There's like, you know, and you're kind of the first person in those situations to be privy to the director's thinking about the film.
Mm-hmm.
And that also includes stuff about, well, who am I going to hire to do this, and who's going to do that, and where are we going to, you know, so you get sort of this global view of the production, depending on how long you're on. But a lot of times you're on for months and months, and you kind of get to see emergencies arise or huge changes, and you see that, oh, for the most part, these things continue on. So it kind of teaches you, okay, well, don't panic. You know, even if something like that looks catastrophic is happening to this version of the story, you know, talented people can react and roll with the punches and change and adapt, and you know, the ship rights itself, and you keep going on. And then that's another thing you learn if you're ever on a film set for an extended period of time. There's fires that crop up every single day. And so much of the job of the director is reacting and adapting to circumstances and not losing it and freaking out, because there's always an answer. You know, there's always an answer. So those were some of the biggest lessons I learned. And then, you know, there was other lessons about aesthetics and about this, you know, I've worked with David Fincher, and I learned so much about just simplicity and just the very basics of, you know, in formulating shots, directing, connecting one idea to another with the camera.
Right.
That's very, you know, very simple things.
Long shot, two shot, over the shoulder shot, back to the, you know, crossing the line, all that kind of stuff.
And it's the ideas behind the shots that count, you know.
And this is a related question from EMC Video.
Mm-hmm.
What advice can you give for people wanting to transition from live action to animation? You've gone back and forth. So what do you think is in a nutshell, what do you think might be important for transitioning from live action to animation?
Yeah. Just realize and embrace the fact that it's a different medium. You know, if you're telling a narrative, all the same rules of narrative apply, you know, dramatic structure, character motivations, you know, anything that's a good story in live action, or anything that's a good story in one medium is going to have the basics of a good story in another. But the thing about animation is you've got a whole different set of expressive tools that are at your disposal. So it's you know, one of the things that I've brought to whatever animation work I've done, it is a bit of a live action sensibility, but it would be, I think, without pushing things further, that would be a limitation rather than any kind of an asset.
Yeah.
You know, so I really do think it's about, you know, embracing the tools of that medium to serve the story rather than limiting yourself or trying to imitate live action, because
right.
that just gets boring after a while.
And it's also slower.
Yeah, right.
So
animation is so much slower than
yeah. Like, yeah, and you know, your performances are in stages. You
Yeah.
write them, and then the actors act them, and then the animators act them again. You know,
Right. Yeah, and it's fantastic because it's like I at this point it feels to me like each pass on an animated film is a writing pass.
right.
You know, it's like when it comes sound, editing, animating, everything, you discover new things that are going to bring out more of the story every time. So
Sometimes even close to release.
you can say that again.
You know, when back in the paper days, you had about 4 or 5 months that you couldn't make a change anymore because you know technology wouldn't allow it.
Oh, not
And now
anymore.
it's like it's 2 weeks. We have another question here. This is I think I think The Rise of the Guardians is one of DreamWorks' most underrated films. How did you get the gig as that director?
Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
I'm so touched. How did I get the gig at Rise of the Guardians?
Yeah.
It was kind of one of those right place at the right time scenarios. I had been at DreamWorks for a few years, and I was kind of working my way up the ladder because Aaron Warner, who had produced the Shrek movies, knew me from a movie called Tank Girl. And on Tank Girl, I storyboarded it, but I also directed the second unit. So Aaron had seen me work as a director and was trying to get me over to DreamWorks Animation after he started Shrek, and succeeded by the time of Shrek III. So from the minute I walked into DreamWorks gates, I think it was kind of like, well, this guy might be a directing prospect. So they were sort of like, you know, kind of coaching me up to understand how the studio and the process worked. And as a story artist, then as a head of story, then I directed a TV Halloween special based on Monsters versus Aliens.
Right.
And that was my first taste of really directing at the studio. And
it's that was a test for you from the executives.
Yeah.
That was what it was. Yeah.
Basically, yeah. And that's like, you know, you're working on this thing for like, you know, 9-10 months, and you learn, oh, okay, now I've got my bike and the training wheels. And and as we were doing that, there was another version of Guardians that was being worked on, but they were having massive story problems. And it's one of those things, that version of the movie, I think because of some structural things about it, it could just never quite come together in a coherent enough way. And they had been working on it for a year and a half, maybe 2 years, and decided they just needed to change direction and start with a new creative team.
Yeah.
And so I came off the Pumpkins thing, and that experience had gone really well, and they got good ratings, and everybody felt good about it. And it just dovetailed with this period where they were looking for new people, and the feeling kind of was, okay, we think you're ready, kid, get on in there. And so we kind of jumped in, and it was a little bit of a moving train because a lot of elements of the story, you know, did remain, but we ended up having to make a lot of changes afterwards.
That's, you know, you were talking before, and when you were talking about live action, how you have to learn to roll with the punches, don't panic. And in animation, sometimes the panic is a little slower.
Yes.
And we used to have these phrases called the crash and burn moments.
Yeah.
And, you know, and it sounds like there was something of that going on, and they said, get the new fire brigade in here.
Yeah, it basically was. And there had been a lot of really beautiful work done. That's the shame of it. But it's, you know, the story, it just hadn't taken, you know, complete form. And, you know, even on it's obviously it's a very tricky, you know, story to try and wrap your head around. You know, I would never for a minute say that we were completely successful either, you know, as fond as I am of that film. But, you know, but it was, that's basically how it happened.
Right. Here's another question. This is from Genevieve. And it's, now, when did you start directing? You started directing before you went to DreamWorks, yes? In some fashion?
I directed, I did second unit directing. And second unit directing, in live action films, you've got the main unit, you know, shooting all the stuff with the lead characters and blah, blah, blah. Then you've got stuff like, you know, insert of watch, truck going down highway, explosion, or, you know, stunts, a lot of stunt sequences, sequence plates that are going to be shot for visual effects to be inserted later. All that stuff is usually done by a second or splinter unit. So I had been doing some second unit stuff on different live action movies. I had gotten my first one through my dear friend John Singleton, may he rest in peace. The movie Poetic Justice, he needed some shots of this mail truck going up the California coast, and I went out with the camera crew, and we went all up and down the coast shooting this little mail truck. So it was that sort of thing was me getting my toe into the pool of working with actual crews, and from there it kind of escalated to, by the time I was doing Tank Girl, we had like a 75-person crew and explosions and tanks and soldiers running around and kangaroo men on cables and all this stuff. So it was getting pretty advanced. And my whole goal from when I started storyboarding was like, I want to be a director. So it was just me climbing the ladder in my own slowpoke way.
And in directing the animated projects, the two, Rise and Spider-Man, you worked with as a team of directors, and how was that? How did you balance that out? How did that work?
It was interesting. It was we all, Bob Persichetti, Rodney Rothman, and I, we all came to the movie with our own skill sets that we were primarily in. So it was kind of a case of whatever fire needed to be put out in any particular moment, we would break out our individual superpower and deal with that. But day to day, I mean, we were all, we all participated in all the design meetings, and we all recorded actors. We all gave script notes. We were all in editorial. So all the functions, we all did all the functions of directors, but there were things like, Bob and I were directing the animation together for the first, I think, probably 5 or 6 sequences of the movie. But then, we kind of realized, oh my God, we don't have a third act, like at all. I had to jump off and start boarding, the first versions of the third act, so that Bob was mostly handling the animation from there on out. So it would divide up like that as needed,
So, and that was the second part of Genevieve's question about the challenges of working together.
Yeah. Oh, actually, I should say that the only reason that worked, I'll say, because a lot of times we did have differing opinions on how this should be cut, or how this scene should work. But we were working with a very strong initial vision from Phil Lord, and everything. It was so, everybody was so into it and so convinced that of the rightness of the direction that was our compass.
I'm going to bring me the question that I had written down. That I had a question now. You had all these characters. You had a mixed race hero, Puerto Rican and Black. You had women characters who are Spider Girl or Spider Gwen. You have old guy character. You have all the and they all had to work together, and they weren't all your normal superhero icon. Even the superhero icon, Peter, the original Spider-Man, was kind of he was having a lot of problems.
Yeah.
Did you get any notes from the administration about, no, we shouldn't go in that direction, and those kind of things, or did it happen organically? Did the comics write that stuff, or did you have, working as a team with the other guys, did you have fights not only with each other but maybe with the powers that be, or did this just kind of flow?
It actually kind of flowed. I mean, as far as the studio, their only real concern was that there was no confusion between the animated Spider-Man and the live action Spider-Man. That was their bright line. They didn't want the two things to mingle.
Yeah, they didn't want an animated live action show.
Yeah, they just didn't want to confuse people. So they said, we don't care what you do, make it as different as possible, but just don't confuse people about, don't make them think they're already seeing something that we want to put out next year.
Pretty good.
Yeah. And honestly, the only character that was ever an issue for the studio was Peter Porker,
Spider-Ham.
They were we don't know if this is going to work. This seems a little too silly, but they obviously didn't know what we were doing with the rest of the movie. So
yeah, and I'm glad he's there. It works great. It's just so great. Here's another question from Anaya, and there's a lot of students at the Ottawa Festival. It's kind of famous
hey,
for
guys.
that. And her question is, what advice would you give a graduating animation student or students who are having trouble trying to find their voice? Sometimes as artists, we have a lot of doubt and uncertainty with our work and have trouble fully believing in our own vision.
I would say try and relax and let yourself learn. You know, there's a time to use your voice. And if you have doubt and insecurity about it, or you know, maybe you're just not ready yet, and that's fine when you're just starting out. There's no, you know, everybody has to learn. You know, nobody comes out fully formed and, you know, who they're going to be 5 years from now right off the bat. Maybe there's like a Mozart, you know, there might be some people who have that. Certainly that wasn't the case with me. You know, I'm still learning. So I'd say give yourself a break. Take some of the weight off your shoulders and don't kick yourself because you're not, you know, Brad Bird or Bob Persichetti, like right off the bat. You know, you've been through school, you've learned a lot. There's still much more to learn and much more experience to go through, so that when you do use your voice, there's some weight behind it and there's some power behind it. So I'd say just keep learning as much as you can, and your voice is going to come on its own.
She also had a question about in creating a portfolio, especially that first one. What are some of the things that you look for, or you think that the powers that be, whoever you're applying to, look for?
Yeah, that's a tough one for me. I've never been in any like official capacity or anything. I can tell you what impresses me when I look at somebody's stuff. If I get a sense that they're not trying to do an animation look, and if there's something of themselves, some kind of originality, or you know, if I can see that they've got influences in their artistic influences in their work, design influences that come from places other than just other animated films, but still work for animated characters, that's very exciting. Yeah. To me, that shows somebody whose mind is more focused on an end product rather than somebody more focused on doing something new and something that's got some that has a connection to actual like creativity and sort of moving forward, rather than imitating or you know, or just being a fan. You know,
here's another one that we all deal with. It's from Juliana.
Mm-hmm. Hi,
How do you balance the hustle, content, work culture of a creative career with breaks with your regular life? How do you do that? Tell me, will you, Peter?
It's hard.
It's hard.
Yeah, it's hard. I'll be honest with you. Well, you've got to love it. You know, you've got to love it. I think you've got to be semi-obsessed. You know, I did, you know, I never took up wood carving, or like, you know, I don't have a hell of a lot of hobbies outside of this, because it feels so encompassing to me that there's so much but I take joy in it, you know? So, it's a good question. I mean, mental health wise, obviously, yeah, you know, you got to give yourself a break. I think finding a way that there's something in your life, and for me, it you know, I had started a family, you know, fairly early. So it's always been going alongside my career. So I always had something to kind of like pull me back down to earth and root me in a way that, you know, there was more that I felt defined me, and not just the career. Because if you stake everything on just, you know, the ups and downs of a career, and you don't have any more kind of, you know, balance or ballast to your life, that can be can be devastating when the smallest little thing goes wrong, you know. So just try to at least cultivate some sense, you know, relationships, friendships, whatever it is, you know. To me, that feels like the most important thing, because I mean, let's be honest, you're going to work long hours and you're going to work hard if you want to advance and be good at what you do in this business. So it's just realizing that that's not all there is to you, I think.
Yeah. That's maybe we should ask our spouses this question, because you're right. They draw you back into real life, and if you base everything on what you do in your job, everything, you're bound to get your can kicked down the road once in a while.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go here. Well, this is Julianne asking a question. What animation positions did you get experience with prior to directing? I know you started early on.
Oh yeah. Yeah. My first animation, actually, if I turn the clock way back, you know, a long time ago, I had a brief fling with animation where I actually I did a little work for an animation studio. Frank, did you ever know Arnie Wong? He had a little studio in Santa Monica called Tigerfly.
No, I used to bid. I was in Florida. I used to bid against the studios here and lose, but no, I never bid against him.
Yeah, I did some work on a G.I. Joe commercial like back in the 80s. My brother Eric, who's a story artist, was an animator back then. He was really good too, and they needed some help, like, you know, doing some little aha type color pencil razzle dazzle on this piece that they were doing. So that was my first exposure to actually working in animation. Doesn't really count. Cut to, you know, what, 20 years later or whatever. And my first real like professional work in animation was on Shrek III as a story artist. And I was learning animation story art versus live action storyboarding, which is two extremely different things. And I cringe, you know, every time I think of the first stuff I was turning on Shrek III, because I just didn't really get it, you know. And I know they were being very patient and kind of like, you know, because when I came to DreamWorks, I had a pretty substantial live action career, and it was sort of like, make way for Prince Ali, you know. And I think everybody was like, okay, let's see what this guy's gonna do.
The Wonderkind is here. Let's be nice to him, right?
And it took a while for me to really get it, you know. But that was my first experience. Was Shrek III, and people were very kind and very. I had a lot of great mentors there. My Rob Porter, like amazing story artist, genius, brilliant guy. The director of the film, that was it's so funny because his name's Chris Miller, the same as the other Chris Miller. There's two different Chris Millers. But Chris Miller was brilliant, a brilliant writer and director. You know, and Aaron Warner, who was like, you know, the Papa Bear who was shepherding me along. So
there you go.
The birth.
You worked with some of those guys. I was there a little before you. I think I left when you were coming in.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there was some pretty talented people there, and willing to mentor people.
Yes.
Willing to be patient with people.
Absolutely. It was like a real collegial environment, and yeah, all you had to do was kind of put in your best effort, and people were willing to, you know, share the tricks of the trade. And Reg Bordage, who was our head of story, was fantastic. You know, there's just so many great people.
Yeah. Here's one that I wondered, in a nutshell, because you brought it up. In a nutshell, there's a difference between storyboarding for a live action show and storyboarding for animation. In a nutshell, what's the big difference? Besides, well, you're still drawing, but what's the big difference?
I think the big difference is in live action, you're sort of doing almost like an architectural plan or a schematic in a sense. I mean, not that it looks anything like that, but the aim of it is to give the director a more intellectual plan for how he plans to tell the story visually. Right. You know, how the camera's going to move, what the composition of the shot is. You know, it's kind of bam, 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 bam. In animation, it's about you're really you're telling the emotional story of the characters,
Right.
is what you're doing.
Yeah.
And which is, something you really never do in live action storyboards. But in animation, you're actually crafting a performance that, and someone going through the boards can get a sense of the emotional journey of the character and the timing and all these other things that are the drawings can be way simpler and looser as long as they communicate those things.
Yeah.
So it's totally different from live action storyboarding.
Absolutely. It is. That's great. It's a great answer. Here's one from RJ DeLeon.
Hey,
what
RJ.
advice do you have for a young writer, creator? And I get this question a lot. I want to write an animation. I want to, what kind of advice do you have them?
Don't think of it as just writing for animation, because it's, I'll tell you, live action scripts and animated scripts are exactly the same. They're exactly the same. Just read good stuff, read good scripts, read good books, read as much as you can, learn as much about structure as you can by analyzing books, plays, movies, figure out why things work and why they don't work. Just look at your favorite movies and try to figure out, wow, why do I like this scene so much?
Yeah.
Why is it in the movie at this point? Or why is this character in the movie? What do they do? Take everything apart, learn how it works, and repeat. That's really what it is.
Yeah, I think so. Anaya said, have you ever felt the pressure to create or direct stories focused on Black perspective or Black culture? Have you ever felt that pressure?
I don't know. I don't know if I'd describe it as a pressure. I mean, it's something that I've always wanted to see and do. I've got like a drawer full of, scripts that I wrote that centered on Black characters that never saw the light of day. And now I'm involved as an executive producer with several projects that have are telling Black stories or have Black lead characters. So that feels amazing. And on the live action side, there's a couple of things in the works, stuff I've written and other stuff I'm attached to that also does. So it's part of there can be a mindset of thinking of Black stories as something that's limiting somehow. And it's not. You can tell any kind of story. That's part of the whole point, that the as a Black person, the universe that you inhabit is as vast and as varied and as limitless as anyone else's. Right. To me, that's the challenge of telling stories about Black people in this particular moment, is to say, well, there's no limit to what kinds of stories. And ultimately, that everybody understands there are no, once you get to a certain point, there are no Black or white stories per se. They're all stories. They're just told from their different aspects of reality. They're different perspectives on something that's hopefully true or hopefully illuminating. And that there's no, I could go the rest of my life telling stories with nothing but Black characters, and every one of them would be different. Every one of them would be some different aspect of humanity that everybody can identify with. So it's, I would just say that it's not a limitation. It's, and I would go further than that. I would say that, particularly now, I think it's a way that anybody seeing these stories and telling these stories, experiencing them, it frees everyone. I think for a white person experiencing one of these stories, if those stories are being told in an authentic and a humanist way, then they're illuminating something of a view of the world that is going to open up a part of you, because you live in this world too. It's people of other races, other ethnicities. The value of those experiences is that those experiences are all as valid as yours. And right. The moment that people open up to that reality, I think their own world opens up, their own mind opens up. It becomes bigger for everyone.
It's interesting. I think you talked about a drawer full of scripts, and
Mm-hmm.
you probably aren't the only African American person who ever has a drawer full of scripts. It's just that up till a couple of decades ago, wouldn't even consider looking at a script.
Yeah.
Then it was the scripts of the Shaft and the black
Uh-huh.
exploitation and the black horror pictures and stuff like that. But now maybe because the politics has changed so much so quickly.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Now, yeah, let's look at those scripts.
Yeah. Or I remember you're dead on about the breadth of material that was deemed to be like, because yeah, definitely I heard the comment, well, who's the audience for this?
Yeah. Right.
Kind of like, well, I remember back in the 90s, it was like, okay, well, I don't know, there's no gangs or anything, and is it really a black story?
Yeah.
Like,
are you sure?
Yeah, I don't know if this really is,
Yeah.
So, but, fast forward to like, I see the movie, when I saw the movie Moonlight, I was like, okay, things are changing. That's a movie that I cannot imagine having been made 10 years before that.
For lots of reasons.
People would have looked at you like you were completely out of your mind.
Yeah.
And they would have asked you, well, who cares about that?
Right.
Who's
gonna watch it?
Who's gonna go and see that?
What's the title mean? It's
relate
gotten all of that stuff.
Yeah.
It probably would have been rather patronizing too.
Oh well, yeah. That's yeah.
Maybe you can find a low budget distributor.
Yeah, right.
That kind of thing. Here's one that's interesting from Jay.
Mm-hmm.
It says, "Hi, Peter. Do you encounter many creative blocks or find times when you feel burned out creatively? If you don't mind answering, what do you find that gets you through these times, or do you just power through?"
Wow. Hey, Jay. And yeah, I do actually. It's. I think there is. I think there do come times when you're a little tapped out, and I don't. It's interesting because there's different versions of it. I mean, like I'm like spreading myself, around a bunch of different projects now that a lot of them I'm just sort of kind of more or less consulting on, and bouncing off other people's ideas, or like, what about this and what about that? That's something. There's that seems to tap into a part that's like always kind of going. But when it comes to like creating something that's got some real importance to yourself, kind of going back to that can get a little harder, to really find something that really makes you like, oh my God, I gotta see this in the real world, so I have to make it. That's tough, and that I think you've got to. That's when you really have to have some time to just live life as a person a little bit, to restore your connection to whatever is out there in the world or the universe.
Take a vacation for a little bit.
Yeah, and maybe that's like, sometimes people say that, well, you need more good input artistically, so maybe it's reading better books and seeing good movies, and but I remember after I had finished Rise of the Guardians, there were a lot of projects that I'd had sitting in the drawer that I just didn't have time to deal with. And after I was done with that, and after I spent my time licking my wounds because the movie didn't do as good as we all thought it was going to do, I pulled a bunch of that stuff out, and I had this crazy creative period where I was just like pumping stuff out over the next 2 years, and I've never been as like, as productive as I had then. And then I got busy with Spider-Verse, and then I had another good spurt after that for a bit. And right now I am feeling a little like, wow, okay, I've got all these projects that are going, and they're kind of on the runway, or they're in very early development. So yeah, there's actually stuff going, but I always want to be thinking of something new, and the well feels a little low right now. So I'm having a little bit of that struggle, but I think it's just time. sometimes. I think you just have to let yourself cycle back to a place where something is built up or stored up. So I think there's some patience, real
Yeah.
patience.
It's interesting that you said, you had this big spurt after Rise of the Guardians was done. Maybe that was in a way preparing you, even though you didn't know it, for Spider-Verse and the run you'd have to make there. And now you've got a bunch of plates in the air. Remember that thing? You had plates in the air on the spindle.
Yep.
And
Oh,
running around.
yeah.
It needs to do that all the time.
That's right.
I have a special one here from Tamu.
Ah.
My 9-year-old is watching with me and would like to know who made the frost in Rise of the Guardians.
Oh, the frost. The frost in Rise of the Guardians, that was a collaboration between a lot of people. Our production designer was named Patrick Hannenberger. Patrick's a great artist, and he and the people in the art department, I know they worked on the look of it. And then our head of visual effects on that movie was a brilliant guy named David Prescott. And so David figured out how to, technically to do all the, to do all the stuff that was necessary, the coding and the software with the visual effects team over at DreamWorks Animation to be able to take what Patrick and his guys had designed and do it so that we could actually animate it and put it in the movie. And it was, I remember the first time we ever saw it, we were blown away. We were completely blown away because it was so much better than anything we were expecting. Yeah. So David Prescott and Patrick Hannenberger. So,
it's an interesting anecdote. Ron and John, I did a talk with Ron and John, Ron Clements, John Musker, the Disney, classical Disney, and they did one fully CG film, Moana, before, and that was their last feature. And they said they'd have something in the show, and they'd say, "I don't think you can do that." And they say, "Yeah, we can do that." You can do that?
Yeah, right.
Really?
That's how I felt doing Spider-Verse. I was like, we can do that? What?
We can make it look like a comic book?
Yep.
We only have about 5 more minutes, so I've only got time. There's a lot of questions, so we could go on and on and on, but that's the schedule. I had the idea of bringing this to life as a comic book, as a comic book look, but not a comic book thing.
Right.
Was that in the forefront when you started doing the picture?
Yeah, that was. I think that was an idea that had. I think from the very beginning, before any of us directors came on, the impulse to take inspiration directly from the comics was there. And the question was, after, like Bob and I, and after we got involved, it was like, okay, well, what exactly does that look and feel like? How far do we take it? What's the, technically, how do you do it? That none of us knew, and that took like a year plus to figure out. But aesthetically, it was how do we do this and still tell a story that's going to be emotionally involving and that's going to move? What's the balance of elements from comic books that we can take that will still work in a movie?
And gain
that
the emotional,
is a real task.
Yeah, and so you don't get lost in just the look of it, which is really important.
Yeah, no, if that ever happened, we would be dead. People would check out in 5 minutes.
And that's one other question. One of the GR3GB is the person who's answered. Do you feel that animation can achieve the same emotional and story complexity that live action has been able to achieve?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the key with animation is letting it be animation, though. You just can't limit yourself completely to the same bag of tricks as live action does, because live action, what you have is when you have real people, there are so many millions of micro cues that go on in like a close-up of a human face, just a human eye. Right. That try as hard as you can, you're never going to get quite the same thing with animation. So there are other tools that you have that can be just as expressive and can communicate ideas just in a different way. But you can absolutely.
I'm going to ask a kind of a fun question before we close. There's a Hitchcock moment in Spider-Verse. And as you all know, Hitchcock always found a place to put himself in the movie for 5 seconds. It was a cameo. And there's a Hitchcock place for you in Spider-Verse, right?
Yes, I think we all have them. And I didn't put myself. I think Bob Persichetti did that one. I'm in the when Miles and Peter are walking up the side of the building, and Miles is trying to convince Peter to help him. There's some idiot in a window drinking coffee who, it's like the old Batman TV series when they climbing up the wall and make some stupid joke. But yeah, I spill my coffee being amazed at these guys. So that's me.
And the other guys were in cameos as well.
Yeah, I think Bob's on the back of I think Bob's on a cover of a Spider-Man comic book. He's the bad guy that Spider-Man is swinging through the city with.
Yeah.
I can't remember who Rodney is. I know he's in there somewhere though.
And how about other people? Were other people in as well? Because
yeah, there's other people tucked in there. There's definitely other people tucked.
Yeah,
I think Phil and Chris are somewhere in the lab. I think they're in the collider. I think they get killed in the collider or something like that. So.
We only have a minute left.
Oh.
Yeah, I know you can't give secrets away, and you have alluded to the fact that you have other projects coming up.
Mm-hmm.
So have you committed to anything yet?
You
don't have to say what it is if you can't do that.
I can say there's like 3 animated features I'm executive producing. One would be very familiar to viewers of this thing, where we've just been talking about Spider-Verse, and then there's a couple of other ones that I'm super excited about. That I'm actually really thrilled about for a number of reasons. So that's all really exciting. And then there's I think there's something that's going to be announced very soon that I'm involved with at a certain streaming service that begins with a big red N. And then
Norman streaming service. Norman streaming service, right? Yeah.
Right. And then there's a couple of live action features that are kind of one of them was supposed to be shot earlier this year, but COVID, and another couple that just trying to get off the ground. Okay. So there's a bunch of stuff. Everything is virtual now, just like this. So it's a weird limbo time, but stuff is on the way.
Spinning plates.
There we go, man. You know it.
Well, Peter, it's been a real pleasure. We could go on. There's lots of questions that we missed, but it's been a real pleasure to do this with you. Thank you very much. Thank you all.
The pleasure has been all mine. It's been great,
Frank. Frank, and thank you, Peter, for your eloquence and humble reflections. It was lovely to hear from you. Hopefully, we'll have you physically in Ottawa.
I'd love to.
For one of these secret, not so secret projects. So we'll see you around. Thanks again. Thanks, ASIFA, and thanks, Leslie, in the background and all the other folks. Have a good one, everyone. Bye.
Hey, take care. Thanks again.